and then heating up the wok. If you do that, you're guaranteed to have sticking. So this technique in Chinese cooking is called hot wok, cold oil. You heat the wok until, well, you heat the wok and then add the oil. How do you know when the wok is correctly heated? I have a little dish of water here, and I'm just going to start flicking a drop of water into the pan. And when the wok is ready, the water will evaporate within 1 second. So it's almost there. With my stove, this is a KitchenAid stove. It normally takes about a minute to preheat. If you had a Wolf or a Viking stove, it might take 10 seconds. If you have an apartment stove, it might take like 2 or 3 minutes. So that's ready. And if you're new to stir frying, I would turn off the heat for the first few times you do it, just so that you don't get things don't sort of like get out of hand. Then take 2 tablespoons of your oil and swirl it in. And then pick up the wok and literally make sure the bottom of the wok is coated with the oil, and then turn the heat back on. That's just if you're new to stir frying, just so things don't get out of control. So here's the shallots and the garlic. I don't know if you can pick up on that sound, but there's a sizzle. So there needs to be a sizzle. If there's no sizzle, then you didn't preheat the wok correctly. The other thing is if you add the oil and it smokes wildly, you've overheated the wok. So now the scallions and the garlic are fragrant. I can get the scallion aroma. So I'm going to add all the carrots. So this is all on high heat. And I'm going to stir fry this for about 2 minutes, just until the shallots start to brown a little bit and the carrots are almost cooked through. The whole time you're stir frying, you will get a sizzling sound. It won't be super loud, but you need to hear that sizzle. I always say to people, your wok is talking to you. And if you don't hear the sizzle, that means as I said, your wok is not correctly preheated. So the stir fry action is just a scooping and a turning constant. And now I'm going to add all the rice. The mushrooms, and the bell peppers. And there's still some clumps of the rice, so I'm literally using my spatula to cut into the rice to break up any clumps. And now I'm going to add all of the egg. And we're stir frying this just for about 2 or 3 minutes. And now I'm adding the soy sauce. Always swirl it in and sprinkling in the salt and white pepper. Never add it in just one spot. So when you're prepping your ingredients, like the mushrooms and the bell peppers and the carrots, the key to stir frying is to try and cut the ingredients in more or less the same size. So you don't want thick pieces of mushroom and thin pieces of mushroom, because by the time the thick are cooked through, the thin are going to be overcooked. It's not as important with vegetables, but this is very critical when you're cutting meat like chicken. So as I said, this is a vegetarian fried rice, but if you wanted to add meat to it, you would add it now. You could add 2 cups of diced roast turkey, chicken. You could add ham. You could add some cooked shrimp that has been cut into 1/2-inch dice. And just check this out. There's absolutely no sticking. And that's it. I'm just going to turn off the heat. We're adding the roasted cashews, the cilantro, the roasted Asian sesame oil, and finally the chili garlic sauce. And for a variation on the vegetarian, you could add edamame. You could add some diced tofu to this. If you're concerned about your weight, if you're trying to reduce the amount of fat in your diet, you could skip the egg yolk and only add the egg white, which only has protein. But this recipe has 2 tablespoons of the oil, which means that for 4 servings, you're only getting, well, there's also 2 teaspoons of the sesame oil. You could skip the sesame oil, and then you're only getting 1.5 teaspoons of oil per serving. So this is a super healthy way of cooking. And as you can see, you don't need to use nonstick cookware, because when you're cooking with carbon steel, it's natural nonstick. And in fact, the heat draws iron from the pan, just as it does with cast iron cookware. So it's an extremely healthy way of cooking. And this is it. I wish you could smell this because it is so fragrant. And I can't believe that I don't get to stop and eat this right now. I just want to say one more thing, and that is these days you can find nonstick woks, anodized aluminum, stainless steel. There's so many different kinds of woks on the market, but honestly, carbon steel is the best. I gave a source for where you can buy this in Manhattan's Chinatown. There's a wonderful store called KK Discount. It's a mom and pop. We call it in New York City. In Chinatown, we call it the mom and pop Target store. It's run by Mr. and Mrs. Lee. They've had the store for over 30 years, and they sell a carbon steel wok for under $30. I think it's $29.95. And once you buy this wok, it will last you more than your lifetime. It's an incredible experience. People have been cooking with woks for over 2,000 years. It's not just a stir-fry pan. That's what I'm showing you today. But when you have a wok, you can steam, boil, poach, stir-fry, pan-fry, braise, smoke, and deep fat fry. I even use it to roast a chicken. I use it for roasting vegetables. I use it for making popcorn. So it's an incredible experience to use a traditional wok, and you will absolutely love it. When people buy non-stick woks, they're not suited for stir frying because most non-stick cookware should not be used on high heat. It actually releases a carcinogenic fume if you put it on high heat. The more expensive non-stick cookware does not, but you can spend $300 for a scan pan wok that's made in Denmark. But you don't need to spend $300. For $29.95, this is the real deal. So I will take questions at the end of the session. Right now, I would like to have you see a video that I created last year in Chinatown at the start of the pandemic. And then we will meet after this video and I'll talk a little bit about the work that I've been doing in Manhattan's Chinatown. Nikki and Amanda, can you run the video?
Yeah, just give us a second. We're trying to open the file.
Okay.
Hello, my name is Peter Lee. I'm the owner-manager of Hop-Key Restaurant here in New York City, 21 March Street. My father and his partners opened up the restaurant back here in 1968. We're a Chinese cuisine restaurant, famous for our crabs and snails, for our seafood. Coronavirus, the crisis started here in January. It's gotten really slow in January, but as time progressed through February and now coming in March, business has dipped down even worse, and I can say that I'm down pretty much from 50 to 70%.
And in a given day, how many customers did you used to have?
Well, at a given day, I would probably have about 40 to 50 covers per day at least. But now, I'll be fortunate to have 20 covers a day.
And your restaurant employees, how long have some of these waiters worked for you?
Most of my employees been working for me for like 10, 15, 20 years, a lot of years. Yeah, they're pretty much basically a family.
And now you've decided that tomorrow you're closing?
Yes. There's no, I'm not happy about closing tomorrow. But the situation leaves a lot of people with no choice but to close up. So hopefully everything be well.
So the background behind the video that you just saw is that on Friday, March the 13th, I received a call from the director of Poster House Museum here in New York City. They had opened a Chinese exhibition of posters about 2 weeks earlier, and they had reached out to me and they had asked me if I could do some lectures for them, cultural lectures about food, and I agreed to. And the director, who I had never met, Julia Knight, calls me on Friday the 13th, and she said, all museums in New York City have been shut down and we're all home. And we know Chinatown is hurting. At that point, in January and February, Chinatown in Manhattan and throughout the United States, all Chinatowns had become ghost towns. There had been no coronavirus deaths in America, and yet Chinatown was being shunned because people were afraid of all the Wuhan news that if you went to Chinatown, you could catch COVID. So she said to me, I know Chinatown is hurting. What can we do to help? Do you have any ideas? And I said to her that I had been thinking that I wanted to go to Chinatown and use my iPhone and do these interviews with restaurant and shop owners and to have them tell their stories of what they had been experiencing in the last 2 months. Because I'd been going to Chinatown almost every day and I was completely stunned that it was completely emptied out. And she said to me, if you do these interviews, we will put them on the Poster House website. How soon can you do them? So I think I would have waited 2 or 3 weeks. It was just an idea in my brain, but because she was saying to me, when can you do it? I said, I'll do it this weekend. So I posted on Instagram. I didn't want to do the videos on iPhone because it was going to be on the Poster House website. I posted on Instagram, I'm looking for a videographer who can volunteer their time for me to do some interviews in Chinatown. And this guy, Dan On, replies, he's available. So I meet him for the first time on Sunday. And we did interviews in 3 or 4 different restaurants and 1 store, this KK discount where I mentioned you can buy the walk. And I thought we would just be hearing these heart-wrenching stories of how tough business had been. But in fact, one of the restaurants that we walked into, the manager, at Wohop restaurant that has been around since 1938, said, I don't know how he knew this, but he said, tomorrow, 70% of Chinatown restaurants will close because business is so bad. And so the video that you just saw is of Hop Key Restaurant, which has been around since 1967. You saw Peter Lee, his father, opened the restaurant. And I don't know if you realize that towards the end, there were tears in his eyes. He was holding it together, but it was really tough. And he brought us into the kitchen. You saw that footage. I've been in so many Chinese restaurant kitchens, and they're always loud and noisy, and you hear the woks going and the chopping and the washing and people shouting out orders. We went into that kitchen and it was silent. Nobody was cooking. There's normally a line out the door for Hop Key Restaurant. At 1 a.m. in the morning, sometimes there's a line out the door. This was the go-to restaurant after you saw a show, a rock concert. You went to Madison Square Garden for a game. You go to Hop Key or Wohop. And in the old days, these restaurants were almost open 24 hours. Maybe 20 years ago, they started closing at 4 a.m. and maybe 15 years ago, they started closing at 1 a.m. And here we were there in the afternoon and they had 2 customers. I will never forget the look on the faces of the cooks, the kitchen staff, the waiters. Everybody looked shell-shocked and everybody knew that we were in trouble. Nobody knew what was going to happen. We didn't know whether or not once the restaurant closed, whether or not that would be the last day or what the future held for us. And so we did these interviews and they are all poignant, and Dan On and I met for the first time. We're working with each other and we both had tears in our eyes for almost every single interview. There was one restaurant owner who said, this is the hardest decision I've ever made in my life. My employees, my waiters have been with me 20 years and I'm scared to do this because I know when I close, how will they survive? How will they pay their rent? So we were in the middle of living history in Chinatown, probably the saddest day in Chinatown's history. And here we are recording these interviews. And as you saw at the end, a few hours later, Mayor de Blasio announced that he was locking down New York City and restaurants could remain open only for takeout. So it was extremely heavy. We shot these interviews, and within like 2 days, we posted the Hopkey interview and a little video of me speaking at the end of the day about what we had just witnessed. And right now you can still see all the interviews that we did on the Poster House website. And last year, these videos were shown at the Smithsonian twice. So they are an extremely powerful document that records the impact of what COVID did to Chinatown. After we shot these interviews, I continued to go into Chinatown during lockdown, and it was really chilling. Chinatown was like a Hollywood movie set of Chinatown. It was completely abandoned. There were days that I walked into Chinatown. There were no cars parked on Mott Street, which is the equivalent of Grant Avenue in San Francisco. There were no pedestrians. There was nobody in Chinatown. Normally when you're in Chinatown, driving down Mott Street could take 15 minutes to get through 2 blocks because there's bumper to bumper traffic and things just aren't moving. But during this period in March, April, May, it was so terrifying. And for the first time in my life, I saw the real possibility of losing Chinatown. And I had just never, ever dreamed that there wouldn't be Chinatown. But San Francisco, Manhattan, and Boston's Chinatowns are completely dependent on tourists. And in 2019, New York City had 66.5 million tourists. And in 2020, I would guess we didn't even have 1,000. So of those 66.5 million tourists that came to New York City in 2019, even if only 10% of them went to Chinatown, imagine how much business they lost. But most people go to Chinatown. Most people go to Chinatown because it's so special and unique, and it transports you to another world. And Manhattan's Chinatown is really special because it's something from bygone era. There are places that you can go to in Chinatown where it's as though you've walked into the 1950s or 60s. They're cash-only businesses. They don't have websites. No one is doing social media, Instagram posts, Facebook. They don't even know what that is. And during the lockdown, before the lockdown, I think there were 297 restaurants in Chinatown, and only 29 remained open for takeout. And they were struggling to survive, those 29. In June, Manhattan's Chinatown reopened, and there were legacy businesses that did not reopen. There were restaurants there was WK that had been in Chinatown for 65 years. It never reopened. There was Hop Sing that had been part of Chinatown for over 50 years, never reopened. Locals were absolutely heartbroken and are still heartbroken. There's a fabulous bakery, Lung Moon, on Mulberry Street, over 50 years, closed. My favorite produce market, over 42 years, closed. It was just, you cannot imagine, I could not imagine what I was seeing. Meanwhile, in April, CNN reported that 59% of independently owned Chinese restaurants across the country had ceased their credit card and debit card transactions, implying that they had permanently closed. And meanwhile, P.F. Chang's, which I believe is the largest Chinese restaurant chain, I think they have over 200 restaurants in this country. They received $5 to $10 million in PPP loans, and they reported last March that their business had doubled. So I kept on thinking to myself, these little mom and pop businesses across the United States are closing. And does that mean that the future of Chinese food in this country is when we want it, we're going to have to go to one of these chains? And at the same time, there were other reports coming out that 233,000 Asian American businesses had closed nationwide. So by June 8th, Manhattan's Chinatown officially reopened. At the time, there was a little bit of energy. By July, there was outdoor dining. I think there was absolutely no indoor dining permitted at all. And sometime in that period, I began to understand that I was in a unique position as a well-known Chinese cookbook author to use my unique position to reach out to the media. And so at the time I was getting offers, or I was getting assignments from different food magazines to do articles. And so each time a magazine would reach out to me, I would say to them, I'd be glad to do the article, but can I also write a piece about what's happening to Chinatown? So in that way, I did a piece for Eating Well magazine about what's happening to Chinatown. The Kitchen, which is a great food website on the web, they made my book Stir Frying to the Sky's Edge their cookbook of the month last summer, and they wanted me to do a bunch of new articles for them. And I said yes, but can I also write about what's happening in Chinatown? Bon Appetit invited me to film a video segment, and I reached out to them and said, can we do something to raise awareness of what's happening to Chinatown or to celebrate what's great about Chinatown? So last year they let me do a Instagram takeover and feature different businesses in Chinatown that are my favorites. I did segments for the BBC. I did segments for All Things Considered. I did that for All Things Considered at the beginning of June when Manhattan's Chinatown reopened. So I kept on trying to push awareness of what was going on. And by October of last year, I reached out to the James Beard Foundation, and I suggested that we could do an Instagram campaign to raise awareness that Chinese restaurants were hurting. So we started an Instagram campaign called #SaveChineseRestaurants. And the idea behind it was that you could post a photo of your favorite dish or your favorite meal at your local Chinese restaurant and challenge your friends and followers to do the same. And that really took off, and it got a lot of media coverage. Food and Wine magazine wrote about it. And if you go on the Instagram page, #SaveChineseRestaurants, it's really an incredible collection of what's happening in Chinese restaurants all across the country. It's educated me so much about where you can find great Chinese food in this country. I had no idea that Las Vegas had so many fabulous restaurants. And it's also really beautiful to see the stories that people post about what their local Chinese restaurant means to them. So actually, I really want to evolve our campaign to include AAPI restaurants, because so many Asian-run restaurants, it's not just the Chinese, but Thai, Vietnamese, Malaysian, Singaporean, they're all hurting right now. So one of the issues about Chinatown for Manhattan was this past winter, you know, when the weather was so cold. Nobody wants to leave their house, let alone to go into Chinatown to eat outdoors. And at that point, I think we were only allowed 25% indoor capacity. And so these restaurants were telling me that they were operating at 20% of what they made pre-COVID. And all of them that remained open were complete warriors because they had so much debt that they were faced with, not only from rent, but one restaurant owner told me that his monthly bill for just electricity and gas and water was $8,000. And insurance and garbage, all 5 of these had to be paid every month on time. He said he couldn't even be late by 1 day, or they would shut him and it might take a year to restart his account. So everybody was pulling their personal funds in order to get through this period when they were still just making 20-30% of what they made pre-COVID. So at this point right now, Manhattan's Chinatown is definitely doing much better now that the weather is warmed up and more people are vaccinated. But with the rise in anti-Asian hate crimes, it means that a lot of locals are not comfortable coming out for dinner. Nobody wants to be walking home or going home late at night. And so there are restaurants that have told me that they have no business at night right now. So recently, as Amanda mentioned to you, I started a campaign with Asian Americans for Equality to raise money for personal security alarms. So 2 months ago, I didn't even know what a personal security alarm was, but it's like a keychain, a little device. And when you activate it, it lets out this piercing siren, which hopefully if somebody was attacking you, it would scare the attacker, but it would also alert people around you that you're in trouble. And so many of the people that we've given them to in Chinatown, the elderly, often don't speak English or don't speak English very well. We've gone into restaurants and given them, and waitresses have said to me, it's absolutely terrifying to leave Chinatown at night when it's so quiet right now. Walk to the subway, take a 1-hour ride on the subway back to Queens or Brooklyn or Harlem or the Bronx. So people are so grateful that we have started this fundraiser to be able to raise money for these alarms. So if you are able to, there are so many people in the community that would be so grateful. The alarms only cost $3 a piece, and they do make people feel 1,000% safer. And people have asked me what they can do, what people should do to fight this insane violence and hatred against Asian Americans and the Asian Americans and Pacific Islander community. And I always say that it's more important than ever to show up to your local Chinatown, to your local AAPI restaurants, stores, shops. It's not just the restaurants, but the stores and shops. Go to the markets, show your support as much as possible. When you go to the restaurants, please pay cash, because when you pay by credit card, there's a percentage that goes to the credit card company. Tip as generously as possible. I always ask my friends and neighbors if I can pick up food for them, groceries for them, to try and bring as much business into Chinatown as possible. So I thank you all for attending this session today, and I hope that you'll support your local Chinatown and your local AAPI restaurants and businesses as much as possible. So I'm happy to answer questions about stir frying, walks, or the work that I've been doing in Chinatown.
Thank you so much, Grace, for sharing the stories and the initiatives that you've done so far and continue to do to help the cause and help right these wrongs against the Asian community. So we do have a couple of questions here. I'll start with the cooking things, just to keep it a little bit light, and we can dive into more of the questions regarding your stories that you just told. So Bridget asks, do you have to use a wok?
No, you could certainly use a skillet, but as I said, when you cook with a skillet, it's not as practical. The design of the wok is genius. It's able to hold a larger volume of ingredients, and the high sides are so practical.
Yeah, I think I'm going to buy a flat bottom wok now because we have one of those glass stoves.
And the other thing is, one chef once said to me, when you stir fry in a skillet, each time you scoop the ingredients, you're actually just pushing the ingredients from one side of the skillet to the other side of the skillet. Whereas when you scoop in a wok, it's actually tossing and tumbling. So yeah, so you're really, it's not as practical in a skillet, and in a skillet, it has a much larger surface area, right? You have a 10-inch surface area or 12-inch or 14-inch. And so that's a lot more oil that you need to use.
So if you could recommend a brand, Selena and Dina would love to know what kind of brand of wok you would.
So as I said, KK Discount sells a no brand wok, which is the flat bottom 14-inch. And that's what I recommend. Or there's also a fabulous store in San Francisco's Chinatown called the Wok Shop. And you can buy there a 14-inch flat bottom carbon steel wok.
Oh, interesting. That's a great name for a
Support
store.
your local Chinatown is what I'm trying to say. Don't buy your wok from Amazon. Don't go to Sur La Table. Don't go to one of these big companies that don't, it's these mom and pop stores that are the heart and soul of this country and Chinatown. And in Manhattan's Chinatown, 94% of the businesses are mom and pop. The rest of Manhattan, south of 96th Street, is completely gentrified. Every other block we have like big box chain stores or banks, or so I don't know how Manhattan's Chinatown has held out, but it has. And so they really need our support as much as possible.
Yeah, I live in Boston and I buy from Amazon all the time, but I grew up shopping in Chinese grocery stores and Chinese kitchen supply stores all the time. And so now that I'm in Boston, I actually passed by a store while jogging, and I was like, when this store opens up again, we have to buy everything for our kitchen in here, just because it's the only store that I've seen in Boston that sells those kinds of goods.
Yeah.
Another question we have from Amy is there a substitute for sesame oil? You have people with allergies out there.
Oh, I would just skip it. If you have an allergy to one of the like peanut oil or sesame oil, there's no need to use it, honestly.
And for Shelly, her question is, how do you feel about using tongs to toss your fried rice? Tongs.
It's not practical. You want to be able to get under the rice. The stir fry method is scooping, tossing, scooping, turning. And with tongs, you won't get under. And it's not like a salad. So you're going to get sticking with tongs because you need to constantly come under.
Yeah, I've seen like the big flat kind of spatula with like slightly raised edges being used in a wok before, but it's a lot of arm work. You got to develop your muscles there.
Yeah.
All right, so digging into some of the questions during your stories, one of the questions was, what sort of challenges did you have to overcome when interviewing or finding people to interview?
So when I told you that on Friday, Julia Knight from Poster House contacted me, I immediately went to Chinatown on Saturday to set up the interviews. And I went from restaurant to restaurant to restaurant, and everyone said they wouldn't want to be interviewed. And finally, one owner said to me, this is a really shameful time. None of us are proud of the fact that our business is doing so badly. So nobody wants to talk about the shame. So I don't think you're going to get anyone to participate. So by the time I left Chinatown, there was only one restaurant owner who had agreed to do it, and it was a woman. May Chow had a restaurant called Oze Peace, which was a Malaysian French restaurant. And you can see her interview on Poster House. And it's a very, very powerful interview because at the beginning of the interview on Sunday, March 15th, she is feisty and strong and powerful. And we are not cutting back hours. We are not closing. And her restaurant was manned. I can't believe I said that. Manned, was staffed by housewife cooks. And she only I think 3 women. So there were like 4 of them together in the kitchen. And in the video, she says, we are women, we are strong, we are not backing down. But then de Blasio shut down New York City. And we realized that we had to go back and interview her again because everything that she said was no longer valid. And so we went back like 4 days later to interview her, and she had closed. And then we see her, and she actually says, I am depressed. I have no words. My last restaurant, we experienced 9/11. You know, the entire restaurant was covered with that incredible dust and debris from 9/11 because she was down in Tribeca. And she said, you know, we cleaned and cleaned and cleaned for 3 days. It was devastating. And she said, this is 1,000% worse. So, yeah, so that's a long way to answer your question. Nobody wanted to talk. And yet when we got into Chinatown after the May Chow interview, I had interviewed Peter Lee from Hop Key for a food and wine article that I'd written in February. And a friend of mine, who's a friend of Peter's, had arranged for that interview in February. And I had said, do you think he would be willing to be interviewed for a video right now for Poster House? And he was like, no way. And suddenly he texts me and he says, Peter Lee just did an interview with the New York Times. If you want, come right now and he'll do this interview. So we were lucky. When I got there, my friend was there at the restaurant, and he brought us to 2 more restaurants that were willing to do the interview only because he was there. So we were lucky. So yeah, you're very right in asking that question. Most Chinese are very private and they don't want to reveal details about how bad business is going or how badly they feel. But it was very unusual. May Chow was very truthful, brutally truthful, and also addressed the anti-Asian hate that her staff was feeling, that her staff was afraid to come in for fear of catching the coronavirus and also for fear of being assaulted coming in on the subway. And Mr. Lee, who owns KK Discount, was really honest, talking about, we went to interview him in March 15th, and we returned to interview him in June. And he said his restaurant business, so he supplies restaurant supplies for all the restaurants in Chinatown, was down 90%. And his regular customers was down 50%. But he said he was really optimistic because he had gotten 2 new customers that day. So if you can, do watch these interviews. They're very, very powerful.
If that says anything to me, it feels like hope that these restaurant owners, you know, refuse to give up. And it's hard for anybody nowadays to not feel like I can't, I'm tired, I'm exhausted. So to help those local restaurants, whether in Manhattan or San Francisco or anywhere you've traveled, what would you have like a top list of restaurants you'd recommend to visit?
Oh, well, in it's sort of Sophie's choice right now. But in Manhattan, we have so many great restaurants. There's a restaurant called Meesum, Meesum on Powell Street. That's the one that was started in 1967. It looks like a Chinese diner. They have the original cash register, and everything is made every day by hand. I just did this, I helped Vogue magazine do a dumpling crawl through Chinatown. And one of the places that I mentioned was Mae Sum, because they make these amazing, in dim sum, the pork dumplings called sumai. They're absolutely delicious there. And they make this incredible mochi dessert, which is stuffed with roasted black sesame, ground black sesame and sugar, or they're stuffed with roasted peanuts and sugar. And it's just like so heavenly. And it's cooked with a little in water that has ginger and osmanthus flowers. But it's really like stepping back in time. In San Francisco, the oldest restaurant, the Far East Cafe, almost closed in December. They're 100 years old. They need our help. There's R&G Lounge in San Francisco's Chinatown. That's amazing Hong Kong style food. In Oakland, California, Peony Seafood Restaurant. It's a dim sum restaurant, also almost closed last year. And a friend of mine wrote about what was happening, and they got a little boost in business, and that was enough to carry them through. The owner manager said he thought he only had 2 or 3 months left, and now they officially reopened in March. So all of these businesses really, it makes a difference that we show up, and it makes a difference for them mentally. There's an incredible restaurant, Hop Lee, here in Manhattan. You just saw the video for Hop Key. This is Hop Lee, Lee. I started another fundraiser with an organization called Welcome to Chinatown to raise money to feed people who are dealing with food insecurity. So mainly seniors in Chinatown, but people of all different ages. And we are having the meals prepared by legacy restaurants to try and protect these older restaurants. And the owner, Johnny, said to me at that point, he said, we have no business. Like they were getting 20, 30% of what they got pre-COVID, which is basically no business to them. That's not paying the bills. And he said, these meals that you're commissioning, so we would have him make 150 meals for lunch or dinner. He says, it gives us something to do. It gives, instead of just standing around looking at each other. So this was happening a few months ago. They're still doing it right now. But all of this is so, so important.
So going back to your book, how did you decide what would go into your book?
Stir Frying to the Sky's Edge?
Yes.
So I wanted to feature the most delicious stir fries, and also to consolidate and to gather up all the tips from home cooks and restaurant chefs of how to get the most success with stir fries. So that was the main goal of the book. Actually, I have a copy of it right here. But as I was writing the book, I discovered, somebody told me about a Chinese Jamaican restaurant outside of New York City. And so I went there, and most of the food was quite mediocre, but they had this one dish, Jamaican jerk chicken fried rice. And they also had Jamaican jerk chicken, I think, lo mein. And I ordered them, and the fried rice was outrageously delicious. So I asked to go into the kitchen, and there was a Cantonese chef and a Jamaican chef. And so I said to the Cantonese chef in Cantonese, how do you make jerk chicken? And he shrugged his shoulders and he said, he makes the jerk chicken, I make the fried rice. But it got me thinking about the Chinese diaspora, that wherever they went in the world, they always managed to stir fry. And so in the book, there are about a dozen diaspora stir fries. So I have on the cover is a recipe. I went to Trinidad, and a home cook taught me this recipe, which is Chinese Trinidadian shrimp with rum. So in Trinidad, they couldn't find rice wine. And so instead of rice wine, they made this stir fry with rum. And it is mind blowing how good it is. She also taught me how to make Chinese Jamaican mango chutney chicken. So simple. So incorporating local ingredients and yet still maintaining the stir fry. So the book is really, there are so many delicious recipes, and there are so many simple recipes in there that don't take much time.
I had never considered adding rum or mangoes to my fried rice. I grew up with eating traditional fried rice, and I think my parents and my dad would say, why would you add rum to fried rice? And then it's one of those things you have to taste it to really understand. The jerk chicken fried rice, Korean fried rice, so tasty.
So there's no rum in the fried rice. The rum is in the Chinese Trinidadian shrimp with rum.
Nice.
But, yeah, so I also grew up in a very traditional household where you only stir fried Chinese broccoli with ginger, never with garlic. You know, there are some classic combinations. And so it really blew my mind to interview the Chinese diaspora and to learn all these amazing recipes. I interviewed someone who was Chinese Peruvian. There was a huge population of Chinese in Peru in the 1800s because they were fleeing China. America had closed its borders to the Chinese, and so they went to South America. So that's why there were a lot of Chinese in Cuba and in Peru. And there's a very famous stir fry in Peru called lomo saltado, which is stir-fried filet mignon. And it is so outrageously good. And they stir-fry it with tomatoes and chilies and these Peruvian potatoes. They actually make French fries with these Peruvian potatoes, and they add the French fries into the stir-fry.
I'm for like adding fries to everything. So adding it to a stir fry is a great excuse/reason to have fries in more things.
Right.
Before we end things, is there a final takeaway or one of the most rewarding things that you'd want to leave us with, or promote one of your what you're doing?
So I think that prior to COVID, I now realize I completely took Chinatown for granted. And I think during COVID, all of us realized that we took a lot of things, a lot of people, a lot of places, our favorite restaurants for granted. And all of us have lost so much during this period. We've seen so much loss. It's very unusual for me right now. I'm known as the stir-fry guru. I'm known as the wok therapist. And now people introduce me as a Chinatown activist. The word activist has never been associated with my name. But I realize, as I said to you, that I had a unique position and opportunity to be a voice for the voiceless. And when I went into Chinatown and I would go into these restaurants and stores and they were empty, the people who work in Chinatown generally work 7 days a week, 10 to 14 hours a day. And they were all showing up. And as much as they show up, it doesn't matter if nobody else shows up. So I realized that if I could get on the BBC or do All Things Considered or get interviewed by America's Test Kitchen or Food and Wine magazine, it would raise people's awareness that these communities, these historic immigrant communities were suffering. And I was very shy about calling the Beard Foundation and asking whether or not they wanted to do this Instagram campaign. And then I thought, what do I have to lose? They can only say no. And so I became bolder and bolder in contacting people. And I felt as though if there's just 1% chance they will run a story and that's going to help one of these businesses, I have to do it. So right now, San Francisco's Chinatown is on its knees. I keep on seeing these awful photographs of Grand Avenue that is just emptied out. And San Francisco, Manhattan, Boston's Chinatowns, they are historic immigrant communities that represent the American story. You know, we are a land of immigrants. And when you go to these Chinatowns, when you look at the tenement buildings, they didn't house just the Chinese, but they housed in Manhattan the Irish, the Jews, the Italians. And so they are a sacred part of America. And developers are just waiting on the wings to swoop in. And I am so afraid that Grant Avenue or Mott Street is going to have a CVS or a Trader Joe's if we don't protect these little mom and pop businesses. So that's a long answer to say, I discovered that I was a lot more powerful than I realized, and that I could make a difference. And that by my making a difference, I can see that it expands. People hear about what I'm doing and it inspires them to do their part. So yeah, we all have to do what we can. And if we don't, we are going to lose these very, very important communities in America that, yeah, need to be protected. So.
Thank you so much for sharing those last takeaways. And I completely relate to seeing, we drove through Manhattan on our way to Boston and moving out of New York, and it was empty and it was heartbreaking. So any sort of awareness that you've been raising, thank you for that. So we do need to end the session. We're a little bit over time. So let me just close things off. Thank you again, Grace, for such a great session. Thanks so much to everyone who joined today's discussion. If this conversation got you thinking about what needs to change in your lives, the best way to process and make a plan of action is to attend future roundtables, including the ones we have tomorrow morning. And at our last but very relevant Mobilize Women session tomorrow, creating a racially reconciled future, happening tomorrow at 12 p.m. EST. Through prioritizing and initiating conversations like the one we just had, we can share ideas on how to rebuild the equitable world we deserve, because through collective action, you can help shape businesses to be more inclusive. Even though tomorrow is the last day of a fantastic week, we'd love to see you there. And don't forget to invite your friends to attend and let us know your favorite parts on social media using #MobilizeWomen. Special thanks to our Mobilize Women Week sponsors, RBC Wealth Management, Accenture, Guardian Life, Verizon, Bunge, BakerHostetler, Diageo, Lincoln Financial Network, Robinson+Cole, Amalgamated Bank, Key for Women, Cornell MBA, Encourage, Coaching, National Grid, Lannick, and Mutual of Omaha. We greatly appreciate your support. At tomorrow's program roundtables we have happening at 10 a.m. EST, the topics we'll be discussing include caring and advocating for ourselves, what's next for seasoned professionals, and an anti-racism community circle. So very relevant to what we just went through and for about an hour. So thank you again for attending and engaging and taking the steps to rebuild the equitable world we deserve. Hope to see you tomorrow at one of our sessions on the final day of Mobilize Women Week. Have a great day/night.